The murder case involving Brad Keith Sigmon sent shockwaves through South Carolina. Known as a man who instilled terror in the community, Sigmon was not only a murderer, but also the first person in nearly 15 years to face execution by firing squad. On March 7, 2025, Sigmon was executed at Broad River Correctional Institution. From a blind obsession that led to brutal acts, Sigmon caused immense suffering and loss for an entire family. What compelled a seemingly ordinary man to become a merciless killer? Let's delve into the story behind this case, including his last meal, his final words before his life ended, and the controversial execution method that left an indelible mark on South Carolina's legal history. This case revolves around two ordinary victims leading peaceful lives until they were tragically linked by Brad Keith Sigmon's obsession. David Lark, 62, and Gladys Lark, 59, were the parents of Rebecca Barber Sigmon's ex-girlfriend. David was an honest man with a kind heart, while Gladys was the spiritual backbone who kept their family together. They lived at 948 East Darby Road in Taylor, South Carolina, a place that seemed incredibly peaceful. The Larks were not only parents, but also strong pillars of support for their children and those around them. They were brutally deprived of their lives on April 27, 2001, in their own home. The perpetrator repeatedly struck them in the head with a baseball bat, a savage and unjustifiable act stemming from a sick personal vendetta. Brad Keith Sigmon, born on November 12, 1957, in South Carolina, USA, grew up in an unstable environment. His mother was only 17 when he was born, and his father, a military man, physically abused him. Brad was the eldest of 5 children and often had to bear the responsibility of caring for his younger siblings. His parents divorced when he was young, and Brad was bounced between his parents' and step-parents' homes. Did these childhood years shape his path to crime? Despite his normal appearance, Sigmon's life quickly turned dark. At 18, his criminal activities began with an armed robbery charge in May 1976. He dropped out of high school to get married, had a son, and despite being described by his family as a loving father, son and brother, Sigmon struggled with both drug abuse and mental health issues for most of his life. Could this turbulent past explain his later actions? Brad Keith Sigmon and Rebecca Barber had a romantic relationship for about 3 years, living together in a trailer. However, in early 2001, Rebecca ended the relationship and moved back in with her parents, David and Gladys Lark. This breakup pushed Sigmon, then 43, into a state of obsession and frenzy. He became increasingly out of control, even tracking Rebecca to see if she was dating anyone else, and constantly demanding to reconcile. On the night of April 26, 2001, after drinking alcohol and using cocaine with a friend named Eugene Strube, Sigmon announced his horrifying plan. He told Strube that when Rebecca took her child to school, he would go to the Larks' house, tie up her parents, and take Rebecca. Strube initially intended to follow Sigmon's plan, but later backed out. On April 27th, Sigmon broke into the Larks' home. He found David Lark in the kitchen and Gladys Lark in the living room. Armed with a baseball bat, Sigmon brutally attacked the elderly couple, moving back and forth between the two rooms to assault both of them. Each of the Larks suffered 9 blows to the head, shattering their skulls. After murdering the 2 victims, Sigmon stole David's gun and waited for Rebecca Barber to return home. When Rebecca returned, Sigmon forced her into her 2001 Honda Passport at gunpoint. He intended to switch cars and drive his own to North Carolina with Rebecca. However, in a moment of desperation, Rebecca bravely jumped out of the Honda and fled. Sigmon shot at her while giving chase, but Rebecca fortunately escaped and sought treatment at Greenville Memorial Hospital. Sigmon then fled the scene. What drove Brad Keith Sigmon to continue this path of violence? From love obsession to brutal acts, the story of his crime shocked the entire community. Following the shocking murders, police quickly launched a nationwide manhunt for Brad Keith Sigmon. An indictment was issued for Sigmon on charges of murder related to David and Gladys Lark, along with kidnapping and assault with intent to kill related to Rebecca Barber. Police focused on clues at the scene. The Larks' home clearly showed signs of a violent attack. The baseball bat, the murder weapon, was found near the bodies. Rebecca Barber's testimony, though she was still distraught, provided valuable information about Sigmon and his plan. His theft of David's gun was also crucial evidence. After an intense 11-day search, Brad Keith Sigmon was arrested in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. He tried to hide, but could not escape the clutches of the law. He was then extradited back to South Carolina to face justice. State authorities immediately announced their plan to seek the death penalty for Sigmon related to the double murder. Although the arrest process was relatively swift, thanks to the surviving victim's testimony, the case still posed a big question. Did Brad Keith Sigmon think he could escape justice forever? His obsession and calculation led to a brutal crime, but the net of the law ultimately tightened. Brad Keith Sigmon's trial began in July 2002 in South Carolina. He was indicted by a grand jury for 2 counts of murder, first-degree larceny, and kidnapping. During the trial, Sigmon admitted his guilt to the jury. The jury then found him guilty on all counts and began deliberating his sentence. The prosecution sought the death penalty for Sigmon. They argued that both Gladys and David Lark experienced the most horrific death, and based on the aggravating factors of the case, Sigmon should be sentenced to death as a demonstration of the mercy he showed his victims. The prosecutor's sharp accusation clearly depicted the unacceptable brutality of the murders. The defense urged the jury to consider mitigating factors. They argued that Sigmon acted as he did due to problems in his relationship, along with a history of drug abuse and mental health issues throughout his adulthood. They also cited his good behavior in prison when seeking a life sentence instead of the death penalty. On July 20, 2002, the jury unanimously sentenced Brad Keith Sigmon to death for both murder counts. In addition, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison for larceny. The reaction of the victim's family, though not described in detail, must have been a mix of extreme pain and some comfort that justice had been served. But was this sentence enough to soothe the pain of those left behind? In the following years, Sigmon repeatedly appealed to the South Carolina Supreme Court and federal courts, but all appeals were rejected. His legal path had reached its end. After nearly 24 years on death row, Brad Keith Sigmon faced death on March 7, 2025. He became the first person in nearly 15 years to be executed by firing squad in South Carolina, a controversial and rarely used method in the United States. Before his execution, Brad Sigmon had his last meal. He requested fried chicken from Kentucky, fried chicken green beans, mashed potatoes with gravy biscuits, cheesecake, and sweet tea. He initially wanted 3 buckets of fried chicken to share with other inmates, a small detail that oddly highlighted a strange contrast between a brutal killer and an act of sharing. On February 7, 2025, the South Carolina Supreme Court issued an execution order allowing Sigmon to choose between lethal injection electrocution or firing squad. Although aware that a firing squad would cause a violent death, Sigmon chose this method on February 21, 2025. His lawyer stated that Sigmon felt the electric chair could burn and cook him alive, while lethal injection could subject him to a prolonged and more painful death lasting over 20 minutes based on reports of previous executions. At 6:05 p.m. on March 7, 2025, at Broad River Correctional Institution, the firing squad, composed of volunteer prison staff, opened fire. Brad Sigmon was hooded, strapped to a chair with a target placed on his chest. According to witnesses, there was no warning or countdown before the Winchester. 308 rounds struck. Sigmon clenched his arms and tried to lift himself on the chair for a few seconds before becoming still. He was pronounced dead at 6:08 p.m. A basin was placed beneath the chair to collect his blood. Sigmon's lawyer, Gerald Bo King, described the execution as horrific and violent. He saw a streak of blood as the bullets hit Sigman's body and felt intense movement for a few seconds afterward. Did this death bring closure to all involved? In his final statement, read by his lawyer Sigmon, expressed hope that the death penalty would end. He argued that his execution for the murders of David and Gladys Lark was not justified under the New Testament, where people live under God's grace and mercy, rather than the Old Testament's an eye for an eye law. The Brad Keith Sigman case raises profound questions about justice, punishment, and the nature of crime. What transformed a man once considered family-loving into a brutal killer? The pain of Rebecca Armstrong. The victim's daughter remains. Although she does not believe in the death penalty, she still wanted Sigmon to face consequences for his actions. Rebecca's son, the Lark's grandson, attended the execution, seeking the ultimate price for his grandparents' deaths. This case not only reminds us of the terrible cost of violence, but also ignites the debate about capital punishment, especially execution methods. Sigman's choice of the firing squad, a more violent method than lethal injection, revealed the desperation and fear of those facing death. Firearms experts even expressed concern about the safety of the execution chamber for observers and executioners due to the potential for stray bullets. The Brad Keith Sigman case serves as a reminder that crime can stem from personal obsessions, unresolved psychological issues, and wrong choices. It also shows how the justice system sometimes grapples with complex challenges, from determining guilt to humanely carrying out sentences.